The engine coughs, a hollow, dry sound in the frozen air, a sound that strikes fear deeper than any enemy's shell. The column, once the cutting edge of Hitler's final desperate gamble, shudders to a halt. The relentless advance of the Panzer IVs and the mighty Panther tanks momentarily paused, not by American fire, but by emptiness. The Ardennes forest looms, a silent white oppressive witness to the German army's greatest, most crippling deficiency: fuel. SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, his face etched with strain, stares at the map. The lines of advance frozen on the paper, just as his column threatens to freeze on the road. His orders from the highest command were clear: drive like lightning, bypass resistance, seize the Meuse crossings, and reach Antwerp. Speed was the only variable that could possibly succeed, and speed demanded gasoline, gallons upon thousands of gallons. But the jerry cans were running dry, and the logistics tail, starved by Allied bombing and crippled by Hitler's delusional expectations, was nowhere to be found. Every mile covered was a victory bought at the price of deeper, more agonizing fuel poverty. The desperation is a palpable thing, a collective dread settling over the men who know that without the lifeblood of their machines, they are merely infantry, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. Peiper sends his reconnaissance forward, a prayer disguised as an order: find anything, anything at all that burns. Through the frosted optics of his vehicle, he watches the lead scout disappear down a barely marked snowy track toward a cluster of farm buildings, the last thin hope of mobility shimmering in the icy morning light. The minutes drag by, each one stretching the column's vulnerability to the breaking point. The scout returns not with the grim report of empty barns, but with a shout of disbelief and a hand pointing toward a hidden depression off the road. Peiper is out of his half-track instantly, driving the short, bumpy distance himself. And then he sees it. Not a few forgotten cans, not a modest cache, but a monumental, sprawling depot hastily abandoned by retreating American forces. Drums stacked waist-high, row upon row, a dizzying, beautiful, seemingly endless sight. They are all marked with the unmistakable U.S. military insignia. The sheer volume is staggering, an estimated 50,000 gallons of high-octane Allied fuel simply left behind. A collective sigh of exultation ripples through the first arriving troops. They are saved. The advance can continue. The mission is back on track. But Peiper stands slightly apart, his relief instantly replaced by a deep, stomach-turning dread. He looks at the casual, almost careless scale of the American supply, then back at his own men, thin, freezing, fighting for scraps, and the final cold truth crystallizes in his mind. This is not a captured victory. It is a display of such overwhelming, casual industrial wealth that it confirms the war is fundamentally and permanently unwinnable. They are fighting not an army, but a logistics machine that can afford to discard enough fuel to power an entire German offensive. The fuel is theirs, but the future is not.
The seizure of the fuel becomes a feverish, improvised frenzy. The SS troops, temporarily forgetting their exhaustion, swarm the depot like desperate miners finding a gold seam. Every container, every pipe, every captured hose is put to use. The air thickens with the intoxicating spilled scent of gasoline as men haul the heavy U.S. barrels, siphoning the fuel directly into the tanks and jerry cans of the German armor. There are no proper pumps, only hands, mouths, and the grim determination to keep the fire of the offensive alive. Peiper organizes the effort with cold precision, but his mind remains detached, fixated on the deeper meaning of the bounty. This captured fuel, the very thing that saves his column from immediate stagnation, now feels like a toxic gift. It has given them the energy to proceed, but it has simultaneously stripped away the last vestiges of strategic hope. They are running on the enemy's blood, temporarily borrowing the illusion of parity. The realization solidifies into a chilling certainty. The sheer, effortless scale of the American logistics, the ability to produce and transport fuel in quantities that dwarf the entire German war machine, renders any battlefield success purely tactical and ultimately irrelevant. His men cheer as the Panther engines roar back to life, the powerful machinery now fed by the enemy's forgotten reserve. Piper gives the order to move, leaving a substantial amount of fuel still behind, prioritizing speed over total plunder, knowing the Americans will soon discover the empty depot. The tanks lurch onto the road, the tracks churning through the snow, the column accelerating to the breakneck pace required by the original doomed timetable. But every kilometer they cover now, propelled by the gasoline of the industrial giant they are fighting, is a step further into a trap. They are not advancing toward victory, they are merely accelerating toward the inevitable point where the borrowed fuel will run out, far from any possibility of German support.
The initial surge of speed, granted by the 50,000 gallons, soon begins to meet the hard, unforgiving reality of the front line. The roads, barely suitable for the heavy armor even before the advance, are now choked with ice and the debris of battle. The Americans, though surprised by Piper's breakthrough, begin to stiffen their resistance. Localized fierce pockets of troops, initially bypassed, emerge to harass the column's flanks and tail. Bridges are blown with chilling effectiveness just minutes before the German tanks reach them, forcing agonizing, fuel-draining detours through frozen riverbeds or demanding slow, exposed engineering work. The high pace required to sustain the offensive is, ironically, the same pace that consumes the captured fuel at a disastrous rate. Piper, constantly pushing, constantly driving his men, sees the fuel gauges begin their slow, inexorable descent once again. The immense reserve they captured is proving to be finite, its quantity unable to withstand the grinding reality of combat consumption and poor roads. The tactical advantages of the capture are being systematically negated by the strategic impossibility of the mission itself. He looks at the map, recognizing the futility of trying to break out now. The Americans are not yielding. They are simply shifting their endless, resource-rich supply lines to encircle the deep German penetration. The column finally comes to an exhausted, forced halt near the village of La Glaise, surrounded and facing overwhelming odds. The American encirclement is complete, a cage of infantry, artillery, and the constant threat of Allied fighter bombers now the weather has cleared. Piper issues the final grim reports, realizing no German resupply can reach them and no further advance is possible. The last dregs of the captured American gasoline slosh faintly in the few remaining jerrycans, a miserable, pathetic remainder of the vast bounty that had momentarily promised salvation. He looks at the gauge of his own command vehicle, empty. The powerful, fearsome armor is now inert, a collection of steel boxes entirely dependent on the will of the men inside. The realization from the depot returns, magnified tenfold. The fuel, which gave them life, has also led them to their doom. The column is not defeated by a lack of fighting spirit, but by a simple, brutal deficit of petroleum, a deficit imposed by the impossible economics of the war. They are victims of the quantitative difference between their resources and the enemy's.
There is no more fuel. The decision is swift, final, and devastating. Piper gathers his remaining officers and issues the order to destroy every remaining piece of heavy equipment. The proud German tanks, including several of the most advanced Panthers, must be abandoned and incinerated rather than allowed to fall intact into enemy hands. The troops, defeated not by an army, but by a logistics problem, set charges and fire to the very machines that were meant to deliver victory. The roar of the explosions that tear apart the steel giants is a sound of final, complete collapse, the terrible confirmation of the doom Piper first sensed at the depot. Leaving the burning, shattered wreckage of his once mighty column behind, Piper leads the few hundred surviving men in a desperate, freezing trek on foot through the forests, abandoning the mission and the entire shattered dream of the Ardennes offensive. The capture of the 50,000 gallons of U.S. fuel was not the turning point of the war, but the moment the German colonel received the irrefutable physical proof of the overwhelming, unstoppable logistical superiority of the enemy. An engine of industrial power that ensured Germany's ultimate, inevitable defeat.